Know what's going on with this. Oh, there we go. Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin Hughes, and we're finally here together in the new year with Loryn Jenkins. And we've been talking about doing this for a long time, so I'm really excited to have Loryn back on our show. For those of you who are new to the show, Loryn is a member and a catechesis director at the Good Shepherd Orthodox Church in Melbourne, Australia. And he's been a friend of Freed Indeed Ministries for a long time. We've done a lot of work together, a lot of overlap in our work. He does catechesis at his church and also does a lot of work in apologetics directed towards the Seventh day Adventist movement. So we're always really excited um, to come together and be able to do that together, especially given the fact that we have so much. I kind of feel like if I lived in Australia, Loryn and I would be like best buddies, and we would be spending all of our time together, um, drinking various kinds of beverages depending on the liturgical season. So, so with all of that said, Loryn, welcome back to the show. I'm really excited. You know, I know we've announced it a couple of times on social media, but we're actually going to be doing a lot with Loryn over the next couple of weeks. He's going to be very generous with his time for us. Because we're doing on today, we are having adventures in catechesis. We're going to kind of talk more about Loryn's catechesis work and how you can access that and benefit from it. And then in 2 weeks, on what is for me, January 16th, and I believe it's the following day. Everything is the following day for Loryn. So for me, it's the 16th. For him, it's going to be on the 17th. We're going to be doing a discussion on sharing tradition with Adventists, which I know is may seem like a daunting task because the word tradition tends to turn off not just Adventists, but lots of different um, people from different traditions. So it'll be useful to discuss that. And then the week after that, we're going to be doing our upgrading the Sabbath Sunday debate, which I'm really excited about because I think both Loryn and I have, in our conversations, it sounds like we've both had a lot of interesting developments in our thesis regarding the Sabbath. So I think that'll be a really fruitful discussion. And I'm I'm just having looked at what Loryn has been saying in our private chat, I'm really excited to pick his brain for the public chat. But before we get into all of that, it has been, I think it's been almost a year since we've been able to connect, even just privately, since we've been able to connect on a face to face basis. We've just been keeping in touch via Messenger. So, Loryn, how the heck have you been, man?
Hey, thanks for asking. So there is a reason that I tend to pop up and become available to you in January. I think it was January last year we kind of had our last engagements and perhaps our last videos. But you know how you have summer holidays,
Hmm.
around July and everything gets quiet and stuff like that. Well, here in the Southern Hemisphere, um, our summer holidays are about now. And so whatever you call the holidays, we have the holidays plus we have our summer holidays all gang together.
Oh, wow.
And so once you hit December, things get pretty quiet, and most people in offices go on holidays for 2 to 4 weeks, and business doesn't start picking up until late January, close to February. So this is our big down period and quiet period, but it's also the period of time when I'm not actually engaged in the catechesis at church. So our school year and our catechesis year basically runs from February till late November.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
That's very fortuitous for for me that you get this whole month where you've got where I can take advantage. Here, let me fix my
yeah,
camera there.
yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Hey, so the it's interesting because one of the things about orthodoxy that here in Australia we're talking about is how to adapt orthodoxy to the Southern Hemisphere. Because
Mm.
if you listen to the hymns and the songs within Orthodoxy, if you look at the Orthodox calendar, it's entirely designed for the Northern Hemisphere.
Interesting.
We turn up in autumn and sing songs of spring. At,
Oh, you're
yeah,
right. You're
because our
right.
seasons are reversed.
Oh,
So
wow.
we've had people thinking, raising ideas and thinking it's not raised to the level of composing hymns yet or proposing things to bishops, but we've had people, thinking about the symbolism of the Orthodox year and how
Mm.
it is tied into the seasons of the Northern Hemisphere, and thinking
Wow.
about how we could re-symbolize Orthodoxy for the Southern Hemisphere.
That's a really unique challenge, and that's kind of near and dear to my heart in a way because I have I have a lot of heart to see orthodoxy spread into other parts of the southern hemisphere as well, like South America and you know Africa. Although Africa actually has a pretty huge Orthodox population, I'm discovering more and more. But lots of places where Orthodoxy barely has a presence or maybe has a historic presence but not a huge presence now are in the southern hemisphere. And you're right, it never even occurred to me that our the very hymns we use in the liturgy tend to be geared more towards the northern hemispheric conditions. So that is really fascinating. And even back when I was Anglican, that was true because I used to always laugh at the idea that, we sing about snow had fallen, snow on snow. And I'm going, in the part of the world Jesus lived, it's not snowy right now. So it was just kind of comical to me. But you're right. It's like that sort of northern hemisphere. So, what are some things that you kind of do to counteract that?
Um, Nothing as of yet, but it begins with the imagination, and it begins with uh, the illumined heart, thinking through the issues about how to make orthodoxy local wherever you are.
Hmm. Mhm. You know, uh, this question just popped into my head. This just occurred to me, but like I have it. It's not here, but at the store I have an icon that has all the American saints on it, and I was just wondering, does Australia have anything like that? Have like some unique saints to Australia?
We don't as of yet.
Hmm.
We have, there is a saint who spent some time in Australia, and that's the closest we've gotten so far. Even on the even on the Roman Catholic side, there is but one saint um, who's been beatified from Australia. So the number of people who've been recognised as being truly holy in Australia has been pretty low, which, given our colonial and what do you call it, the people who were incarcerated who are coming here,
Right.
it probably suits us to have not too many holy people yet.
I suppose that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you wouldn't expect lots of saints coming out of a penal colony.
No. Hey, so just to help a guy out from the southern hemisphere, I noticed that a lot of my friends from North America talk about the holidays, and I did live in Atlanta for 3 years, but I actually never figured this out. What exactly are you meaning when you say the holidays? Is it
Um,
just Christmas / Hanukkah / is it just the name for a non-religious way of referring to Christmas, a neutral way of referring to Christmas, or is it something else?
I think it started as a neutral way of referring to Christmas, which is why you see a lot of people sort of militantly saying keep Christ in Christmas in the US, because it's like there's this almost militant, like, no, I say Merry Christmas, I don't say Happy Holidays thing, because that's kind of how it started. But there's also a lot of, like, so there's Christmas and there's New Year, and then if you're on the New Style calendar, you have Epiphany right then. You have, so there's a whole bunch of things that sort of culminate all at one particular point of the year. And for a lot of people, I think that talking about like Happy Holidays is sort of a way to refer to all of that, because before that we used to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, like the song, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That was usually how people talked. But then in, I want to say around the 90s, people really started to shift to saying Happy Holidays, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with that shift for the kind of implications of, does that mean we're secularizing or whatever? Even though in any discernible way the US was already secular by the 90s. So I'm not too sure what people were so up in arms about it with that kind of cultural shift. But but yeah, so it is kind of, it's like it's kind of a non-religious way of talking about Christmas, but it's also morphed into kind of a colloquial way of just getting all of your ducks in a row all at once and shortening so that you don't have to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And it's just the radicals
Well,
like me who still say the whole thing.
yeah, cool. Well, just like a lot of things, Australia's, um, 10, 15 years behind the North American trend. Just until recently, saying Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year has been quite common.
Right.
I'm still seeing, and a Happy New Year. I'm starting to see some shyness in saying Merry Christmas.
Oh, really?
So I think, like a lot of things, we get a huge amount of American culture here in Australia through media. There's definitely an element of American imperialism through cultural export happening,
Right.
and we constantly pick up what's worst about American culture here in Australia
Oh.
and not what's best.
Oh, well, as an American, I deeply apologize to you for that. It's, yeah, that is kind of how the United States exercises its ridiculous amount of power. Actually, speaking of that, I do have a question. So you guys are actually really close to Japan. Do you get like a lot of Japanese television, and do a lot of Australians speak Japanese?
So
How's the relationship?
we're close to the same time zone as Japan. So Sydney and Melbourne are within, I think, an hour of Tokyo,
Wow.
in terms of time zone, but we're kind of like 12,000 kilometers away, 16,000 kilometers away, something like
Oh,
that.
interesting.
So it's up north, but it's way up north. It's in your hemisphere, not ours.
Oh, interesting.
Now, there are people of Japanese extraction who, in Australia, who do pick up and watch a whole bunch of Japanese TV, but I don't know where they pick that up from. But it is available in Australia if you want it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know why that just popped into my head, but I was kind of thinking, like, man. But I guess yeah, it seems like I don't know. It seemed like in my head, Japan and Australia were pretty close to each other, but I guess that's not. They're
Well,
not
that's
as close in reality.
nah. Well, that's true with respect to time zone, but not with respect to latitude.
Okay, fair enough.
Mm, mm.
So what about what have you guys been doing with regard has anything changed with regard to COVID? In the United States, a lot of what we hear makes it sound like Australia is super strict with regard to COVID, and you know, you Americans have it so great, and then I don't know. I I don't really know what it's like there regarding COVID. So has that been a challenge for you? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah, look, it's been a really big challenge this year. Um, we thought we were out of lockdown at the end of last year. We opened up and started getting on with life, and then we were plunged back down into 3 more lockdowns this year, which lasted for a pretty long time. Um, the the federal government, in conjunction with the states, agreed, 2 years ago that the strategy that Australia was going to adopt was a strategy of suppression. Their aim, the formally stated aim, was to prevent the hospital system from being overwhelmed, and in order to do that, the aim was to suppress the spread of the virus. All the states signed up to that, but then they went away and, instead of suppressing it, actually worked on eliminating it. And so, to eliminate it, they had us pretty much locked in their houses for months, 4 months in 2020, and I forget the timing, but this year down here in Melbourne, we became the most locked down city in the world based on duration of lockdown.
Oh no.
And it's been pretty tough. It's been pretty tough. Even though I work from home and am used to being reasonably, alone and reasonably, just connected to people through video chats and things like that. Not being able to get together with my friends and fellow communicants from church has proven to be pretty tough. When you're stuck at home, you tend to, adopt some bad habits. You tend to go out and exercise less, and get stuck into more chips and things like
Right.
that. So, the isolation is surprising, and I've developed a bit of empathy for prisoners and
Mhm.
people, political dissidents, and people who've been locked up historically. It's a pretty tough gig being isolated from people. So the big push from the Australian governments has been to get Australians vaccinated in order to prevent the spread of the virus from just overwhelming the medical system. But after such a long time of lockdown, the politicians held out to us the carrot that once we hit a certain level of vaccination, 80% or so, that we would open up. So as of now, 93% of Australian adults have been vaccinated with 2 doses, and then a whole bunch have been vaccinated with a booster shot. And Australia has opened up, so pretty much you can go anywhere and do anything, albeit in some public places like shopping centres and stuff, you're wearing masks still.
Right.
But other than that, other than a bit of mask wearing in a supermarket or in a shopping centre, it's starting to get back to life as normal. And I think the political will to lock people up has diminished. I think the opinion polling shows that if the politicians continue lockdowns, that they're going to get voted out at the next set of elections. And we've got a bunch of elections coming up next year. So we're hopeful that they're not going to resort to locking us down again.
Well, I guess that's good. You have that sort of threat of being able to. Well, if you keep us locked down, we just won't vote for you then. So, you mentioned that about bad habits and things, but I have to say you're looking pretty good. So it doesn't really look like you've gotten into too many bad habits. Are Have you been like on really strict on a regimen, or is it just the Advent fast slimmed you down?
No, it's just that like a lot of males, I put on weight in specific areas of my body.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, yeah, I think
My
I have
doctor,
to.
every time I go to my doctor, he goes, "Okay, so the next challenge is to lose weight. Yeah, you got to lose weight."
Yep, that's why I don't go to the doctor, because I know he's gonna tell me that I have to.
Oh, it gets getting kind of frustrating. You go to the doctor and you say, "Oh, I've got some headaches." He goes, "Oh, lose weight." There you go. "Oh, I've got a pain somewhere. Lose weight." "I'm concerned about this function. Lose weight."
It's like, man, I'm not seeing the connection, doc. Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. I do. So, in the last year, we last year we talked about the foundations, and I sent a lot of people to watch the foundations, and I'd like to know, what are some things that you've seen from that? What's what's maybe been happening with that? Have you had a lot of interactions with people regarding that? What's kind of been the sort of result of all of that great work that you did with foundations?
Yeah, cool. So foundations ran again this last year. So in 2020, we had, I think, what one of the uh, people at our church called Foundations 1.0, which was a series of 10 presentations that led people through some of the basics of Orthodox dogma and doctrine. And we interspersed that with what we call practica, just practical things: how to pray, how to build an icon corner, how to enter the church, how to use candles, and how to cross yourself, and what the traditions of the church are, both in private, at home, in your work life, and when you're actually in the church building.
Those were some of the most rewarding lessons from my perspective, because I loved all the theology and things, but some of the most rewarding ones were those practical things, just because it was like, like you said, in the home, in the workplace, it's like you can sort of follow along at church, but when you're at home, you really need to be able to sort of self regulate that. And it was really cool to have that And that was one of the things that I felt was kind of unique about your program. A lot of them don't focus on that as well as you guys did. I can't believe that that's all the way back in 2020, though. That's so weird.
Mm. So it was the Foundations 1.0 2020 version that we recorded as the YouTube presentations. In 2021, we adopted what the same person called Foundations 2.0, which was we took the outline of Metropolitan Hilarion Alfayev's 5-volume set of books on orthodoxy, and we used that as the outline of our course, and we turned that into a 20-part course and had it running every 2 weeks from early February until late November. So that's what we did this year. We incorporated a huge amount of new material, and we continued also with the focus on practica as well. So we would do a main presentation, we'd have a discussion, and then we'd have a 10-minute presentation on the practica.
Mm.
And that's how we ran through the year. When we began the year, we were doing things in person and online. So we had about 20 people in front of us in person and about 5 or 6 people online. And then as we got locked down and unable to meet in person, the whole thing migrated online, which has some pluses and minuses. I know a lot of people much prefer the in-person. I do. I prefer
Right.
teaching in person. It's much more rewarding actually seeing people's reactions straight in front of you. When you're online, people can seem to get pretty blank-faced, and there's less interaction. When we have online chats, you can have an online chat, but when you have a chat in person, when you break into discussion groups in person, you can just hear the noise level rise, and you can hear people just break out into a lot of chatter, and the discussion gets pretty intense and pretty free flowing when you're in person. It's much more regulated and much more it's much slower online. So so there's a couple of negatives are going online, but the positives are that we've had people from regional Victoria, from New South Wales, and from far north Queensland being able to join in.
So you have people all over Australia
Yeah.
being catechized through the Good Shepherd.
Yeah.
So do you have to find churches to connect them with?
Yeah,
Or
we do sometimes. Yeah.
wow.
So we've we just had someone get baptized, and he was in Newcastle, north of Sydney. So we have a friendly Russian parish up there. We was able to contact the priest, and we said, "Hey, we've got a person who's been fully catechized, just ready to be baptized. Here's the contact details. Go and have at it." And so he was really happy. He was like, "Oh, terrific! You've done the hard work in catechism. Ready to baptize and bring him into my congregation. That's great."
That's awesome.
So
Now, do
we
you maintain a relationship with those people at all to know kind of what's going on with them?
Yeah, so look, with the COVID lockdown, we've had to take all our programs online. So we've had a patristic reading group running on a Monday night. We've had Orthodox Christian Fellowship running on a Tuesday night. We've had prayer group running on Wednesday night. We've had a book club running on Thursday night. So we've taken a lot of our programs, a lot of our social programs online, and so we are able to have people from regional Victoria, and do have people from regional Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland joining into all those programs and being able to connect, ask questions, and fellowship with us.
Nice.
I don't know whether you may have heard there's been an ad running on Ancient Faith Radio done by this Australian guy who was up in Queensland and who dialed in and said, there's I'm a long way from orthodoxy. Help me understand about orthodoxy. And Ancient Faith have been
Yeah.
playing that as an ad. So he hasn't actually connected with us, but we've had a lot of people like him actually connect with us.
Really? That is so cool. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So hey, look, I wanted to turn the table around now.
All right.
And I know you've had a big step with your Queen of Peace bookstore. I want you to just tell us a little bit about how this came about, and what you've discovered and learned since you've been running the Queen of Peace.
All right. Well, how it came about is kind of interesting because we actually, so I think it was maybe even 2 or 3 years, probably 3 years ago now, in 2019, that we found out that this little Catholic bookstore was looking to sell. And so we started looking into it, and we did a lot of legwork to try to buy it and do these things, but it just kind of fell through. And um, at the time, just, I think I was just getting into converting to Orthodoxy, and then the lockdowns happened for us. So at that point, it was just like, well, we're definitely not going to buy a bookstore right now because we couldn't even have it be open anyway. And then, to be honest, I just sort of more or less forgot about it. And then my dad is a member of the Knights of Columbus, which is a Catholic men's organization. And he was talking with some of the Knights of Columbus, and they were saying, oh, Alice, the lady who owns that bookstore, is looking to sell again, and she really wants to sell it to the Knights of Columbus. And so my dad was kind of spearheading the Knights of Columbus effort to be involved in that. But because of the experience we had had before, he kind of didn't think that it was going to go anywhere. So he didn't really clue my wife and I in on the fact that he was doing this until it got to a point where it looked a little bit more serious. Then he started talking to us again. Um, and at this point, I was kind of thinking, I I just don't know if we're gonna be able to do this. I really don't know. Um, but it is what it is, and I'm definitely interested. And that was all I said to him, is I'm definitely interested. And I kept, at that time, I, I was selling life insurance from home, and that was kind of my big thing that I was doing, and then doing Freed Indeed Ministries. And uh and my wife was finishing up her education, so that was really neat. She finished her master's degree in biblical counseling during that time, and we went down to California so she could walk at her university. And the nice thing about working from home was that I didn't really have to take too much time off. I was able to work pretty much the whole time that we were down in California. So that was pretty cool at that time. And we were really busy at that time, and again, just more or less forgot all about the uh, the potential of the bookstore, and it was kind of in the back of my mind, I would say. But hi, hi, Allison. Allison just joined us. It was kind of in the back of my mind, but I wasn't super serious about it. And then, and then all of a sudden, one day, my dad says, "Okay, um, we're looking into doing this, and we have somebody who's kind of a donor willing to donate some money to it to help us get the bookstore and get started." And I'm going, okay. And I'm thinking at this point that, okay, so this means we're going to potentially do this in like 6 months. And I show up at the meeting with the lady who owns the bookstore, and for as soon as I show up in the meeting, she's like, "Okay, can you sign here?" Okay, and then I owned the bookstore, and I'm going, "Oh, okay." So my dad and my wife and I all went in on this together. Um, so we all actually have an equal share in this bookstore, and my dad and I basically are the ones who work it, and my wife does her counseling, and she shows up at the board meetings that we have every month. So she's involved. She's kind of behind the scenes involved, and my dad and I are the ones who are there more. And it's been really nice, actually, a really great way to connect with my father in that way. I would definitely not say that he and I were estranged before that. We had a good relationship before that, but a lot of the relationship that my father and I had were established more when I was much younger. And in recent years, for whatever reason, it's like we just haven't really spent tons of time together. There's always been something, um, it's like we would get together for the holidays, and then other than that, for the most part, um, I think I think a lot of it is me. I'm just a lot of a homebody, so I would be at home with Cheryl watching movies or reading books and stuff, and I would go to work, and that would be about it. And then but getting together, and then we moved back up to Vancouver, which my wife and I moved back up to Vancouver in, I think, 2019, right before all this kind of started. So we were living up here, but we weren't really, I don't know, we still didn't have, I don't totally know why, but we just didn't have tons of connection there as far as actual time spent. And now being able to connect with my father like that has been really cool. Kind of having more of building a relationship where where it's not just how it was, when I was a kid. It's like we're actually, we've both, he's recently retired, so we both are coming from established careers into kind of a second venture together. We both are coming from lots of different, and it's just been really rewarding in that way. But, obviously, maybe more importantly, it's always been my wife's and my goal to eventually do something like this, have a bookstore. Um, and just being able to do that has been really excellent, really rewarding. And yeah, it's kind of it's kind of amazing and miraculous, because it's like every step of the way it was just this total God thing where I'm going, okay, we're really excited about getting this bookstore, and then all of a sudden it kind of fizzles out, and we're going, I don't think it's going to happen. And then 2020 happens, and businesses all around the area are closing, and we're going, well, I guess it was a good thing we didn't buy that bookstore. And then the opportunity arose again, and it was just sort of at the perfect moment where we were able to take over, and we've been able to really cultivate a relationship with St. Vladimir's Seminary, so that we're carrying tons of patristic books, and ancient faith ministries has really come through for us and built a connection with us. And so we're able to have lots of really good books, and really beautiful icons and things, which I've I've talked a lot about our icons and stuff, and how that's been just a blast being able to sell icons, because learning so much about reading icons and the symbolism involved, and it's just been super cool. Um, but yeah, so it's just really fascinating. So much had to come together, and in kind of a crazy way, it all just kind of popped into being out of nothing, and it's been really, really cool.
No, it was
Um,
pretty cool. It is pretty cool because just look, a few years ago, there was an Orthodox bookstore that was up for sale here in Melbourne.
oh, really?
Um, it was offered to folk from the Good Shepherd if we were had the capacity to buy it. But and I know there were more than one person, several people from the Good Shepherd who were going, if we could buy a bookstore, we could parachute Loryn into that, and he reads a lot, and he'd be great at shepherding people through and showing people the range of books and so forth and so on. But that didn't happen. We just uh, were not able as a congregation to bring together the money and the investment to make that happen. And that bookstore was sold to the Greek Archdiocese a few years later. So we had to pass on that. But it's pretty darn cool that you managed to get in there. I know you're looking forward to it for a while. Hey, now,
Yeah.
looking at your Facebook feed, I see images of you wearing your Godzilla versus Kong t-shirt. And I understand Cheryl gave that to you as a Christmas present.
She did. She did,
So
yes.
where did this love of Godzilla and Kong come from?
Oh, so that's an interesting, that kind of goes back. So I really grew up just adoring the Godzilla movies and like the really old ones from the 60s. And I also grew up, I mean, kind of when I was growing up, you had all of these Godzilla movies and I was watching them all the time. And I think even I used to watch them with my uncle Terry a lot, and I think he's kind of joked with me that because of me, he still has all these movies memorized. like, like he and I could go back and forth and quote pretty much every scene from these movies because we actually watched them so many times that this is back in the day when things were on VHS. We watched them so many times that we actually corrupted the tape. And so and interestingly enough, I also really loved the series from the 1990s, the Godzilla series from that time. I think it's called the Heisei era. Um, really good Godzilla. Actually, I know it's called the Heisei era. Um, they really good movies, but they weren't super available in the United States. So I think I had Godzilla versus Biolante and Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla 2, which I don't know why that one is called Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2. It's not actually a sequel to anything that went before it, but movies are weird. So I had those two movies, but nothing else from that series, which is kind of comical looking back because it's like I had bits and pieces of a story that was supposed to be a complete story, and it was only several years later that I was finally able to watch the whole series from the 90s. But in the meantime, the series from the early 2000s came out, and I was too little, I think. Well, I wasn't that little, but I was too young to really care that much about the fact that some of it was cheesy. So I just knew that, hey, there's more Godzilla stuff coming out, and this is really cool. So I was into that, but part of me knew that it wasn't as connected as it had been before, and so it just kind of fizzled out in a way, and I kept going through life. And then when I was in my time of being Seventh Day Adventist, I was basically, you're not really allowed to be interested in things like Godzilla when you're Seventh-day Adventist. So I sort of put all that on the back burner, but I still thought it was cool in a way, but I was kind of, I don't know, I was kind of distanced from it and distanced from a lot of other things that I was really interested in, um, for various reasons. But when shortly after my wife and I got together, um, and we were kind of in the process of leaving Adventism, it was really, we hadn't gotten married yet, but we were in the process of leaving Adventism together. And in 2014, there was a new Godzilla series that was announced to be happening, and it started with the Godzilla movie in 2014, and we watched it. And I have to admit that the first time I watched that movie, I did not like it super much because the movie focused a lot on sort of the human drama. And I'm going, man, where's the Godzilla from the 60s who just shows up and starts trashing everything? And what's all this human drama? I don't care about that. Um, but then, but then in 2019, they came out with Godzilla King of the Monsters, and that, I think that really reawakened the love that I had for Godzilla from the past. And one thing that was cool about it too is that Godzilla King of the Monsters actually has a very spiritual theme, which the original Godzilla movie had a very spiritual theme too, in a weird way. But at that time, I was also getting into a lot of, I had, I had for a long time been into studying the Book of Enoch, but I didn't really know of any scholastic studies of the Book of Enoch. So it was just kind of like I was reading this, but I didn't have any ability to really work with it. And I noticed I was super excited because in Godzilla King of the Monsters, it brings in a lot of the themes that you actually see also in the Book of Enoch, because I now know from some of the things that I've discovered since then that there's this sort of universal history that Godzilla King of the Monsters is playing off of. So if you watch Godzilla King of the Monsters, you can see tons of different mythological elements come to play in it. That's super fun for a nerd like me who just not only loves Godzilla but loves studying these weird mythological things that I think bore a lot of modern people. But so there I am watching this, and it's all kind of coming together. And then I think it was actually the in 2020 itself that I discovered a lot of Lord of Spirits podcast, Jonathan Pajot, and a whole bunch of other things really came together to where I was like, wow, there's other people studying all this stuff that I've been sort of dabbling in but not knowing where to go with it. And that took, I think that helped also to mature Freed Indeed Ministries in a way, because Freed Indeed Ministries, I think, was struggling to have an identity at that time because um as I was converting to Orthodoxy, my priest actually um wanted me to continue doing Freed Indeed Ministries, uh but he wanted me to keep doing it. And I think a big part of that is because he saw the potential value with a lot of these things. And but it was difficult because I wanted to keep the identity being sort of the apologetics towards Adventism. I also wanted to have the identity sort of take on a more orthodox flair, but I had so and I wanted to be able to produce materials that were worth listening to regarding a lot of the stuff that I was really really studying. But again, I was having it was really difficult back then. I don't think people today realize how difficult it was if you were a layman back before probably 2016, 2017. It was really difficult to find resources on, the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jubilees. It wasn't difficult to find people talking about them, but it was difficult to find anything worth listening to about them because most people who were talking about those things were had all sorts of other wacky ideas. So there were tons of people talking about, like, say, the Book of Enoch or connections between Akkadian mythology and the way that Isaiah talks about various prophecies and the way that Isaiah talks about the fall of Satan versus how the Baal cycle talks about the rise of Baal. It's like these are actually what Isaiah is doing is he's turning the Baal cycle script on its head and saying, yeah, you did rise up against the Most High God, but it didn't work out for you. You got cast down. And he actually quotes from the Baal cycle because in the Baal cycle, Baal sets up his throne in the underworld, and Isaiah kind of mocks that, and he's like, by your own admission, you had to set up your throne on a dunghill, so like maybe that's a good admission that you didn't win this fight. But and so I was reading all of this stuff, but nobody else that I have access to at the time is interacting with this stuff. And then all of a sudden in 2020, there was this explosion, at least from my perspective. For other people, I think there was a little bit more access to it because Dr. Michael Heiser had been working for a while in it. And I think by 2020, the Lord of Spirits podcast already had been going for about a year. So there were other people working on this stuff, but I hadn't seen it. And then all of a sudden there was just this explosion of interest in within the scholarly community and within communities that I was really working in towards a lot of this stuff. And it just so happened that my appetite was really whet for this because of that Godzilla movie. So I'm just like, wow, this is perfect. This couldn't be happening at a better time. And it really brought everything together all at once. And then the bookstore coming at that time was kind of perfect because I had this just basis to really take off and run with all these things working together so that I could have this kind of really it it's a really fascinating story of how tons of disconnected elements came together in God's perfect timing for that. And so I don't know.
That is so super cool how the openness to culture, the openness to Kong has led you into this whole re-enchantment of the world
Mhm.
movement. The works of Heiser, the Walton's Lost World series, the
Mhm.
Ancient Faith, um, metaverse, if you like. Pajot on symbolism, his brother on reading Genesis through a symbolic
Mhm.
focus. It's all super cool. There's all these strands and threads going everywhere, and being connected up, and that's all terrific. Now I noticed that Father Andrew Stephen Damick from Ancient Faith Radio has jumped in and a couple of years ago transferred his love for the Lord of the Rings into that pretty super cool Amon Sul podcast.
Yes.
Is there any movement from Treat Indeed to take the spirituality of Godzilla versus Kong and move that into a series?
Well, um I think that there's an orbit around that. So I I'm testing the water on that right now. I have an article that I wrote called What Godzilla Teaches Us About Theology. And I was a in that article it's kind of interesting because I sort of take the themes of the Godzilla movie from 2019, and I felt that I had to do two things in a short space. Because on the one hand, I had to sort of prove to casual Godzilla fans that who don't who aren't necessarily paying that close of attention that this spiritual element has always been there, because that was one of the critiques actually that that movie received from a lot of people who don't really weren't really in the know. So a lot of Hollywood critics and things said that one of their big beefs with the 2019 Godzilla movie was, where's all this like religious stuff coming from? Um but that critique shows that if that's what you're saying when you see that movie, then I think you've missed the point of the first 60 years of Godzilla movies, because in even in the 1954 movie, everybody kind of picks up on the anti-nuclear war message of the first movie, but what they miss is that um, if you listen closely to the dialogue in the first movie, what is said is that what Godzilla actually is an ancient god that the Japanese people used to worship. And it's because they forsook this God that sort of the judgment that came upon the earth was the nuclear holocaust resulting from World War II. Basically, the Japanese lost their spiritual state, and because of that, the punishment for it was World War II, because their own sort of hubris led them to build this empire, and they end up suffering even nuclear warfare. Well, one of the things that results from that, though, is nuclear war, or at least nuclear weapons, awakened this ancient deity. And there's some language in there that it also scarred him, which I don't know. I think there's kind of a conflict there between two directions that the original movie wants to go in. It wants to be anti-nuclear weapons, so Godzilla has to hate nuclear bombs for some reason, but it also wants to be calling the Japanese back to their own traditions. So as a result, there's kind of this interesting blend going on, and that theme carries throughout the series. So I had to show that to Godzilla fans that, hey, this theme actually carries throughout the series, that there's always this, what this franchise wants us to see is that science is good and spirituality is good, but the human person is not intended to be a person who's purely materialistic or purely spiritual. And whenever we forget what we are supposed to be, we call upon ourselves grave trial, and that trial becomes sort of embodied by this ancient god of destruction that is Godzilla. But what's fascinating to me is that Japan is not a Christian nation, and yet I feel that this message that the Godzilla movies or the Godzilla series as a whole is sending is a very Christian one, that human beings are intended to be, we're not intended to be purely materialistic, and when we try to be purely materialistic, we destroy ourselves with things like nuclear bombs, and with just, even just sort of, you could apply this to the environmentalism debate. It's like, you know, I see so many things now that, oh, humanity is a parasite. Oh, this, well, humanity isn't a parasite because humanity has been on this earth for so many years without causing any damage to it. But the way modern people live, where we try to be these materialists who don't have any connection to the earth and these things, that's not sustainable. And that does become almost parasitic in nature. And Jonathan Peugeot has talked about that with much better clarity than I probably could. So I'll leave that to him. But it's like, so on the one hand, we can't be too materialistic, but Gnosticism is the reverse of that. And in Gnosticism, humans are sort of these encased spirits, and we really should just pursue the spiritual and ignore the physical, and the physical is seen as bad. Well, that's anti-Christian too, because in Christianity, we aren't purely material or purely spiritual. God has actually created us to be both. And if we don't pursue both, then we end up leading ourselves to destruction one way or the other. And so I do think there's great potential for a spirituality of Godzilla um, thing that you could do similar to Amansul. I'm not 100% sure that it would be as popular um, as Amansul, given that I think J.R.R. Tolkien, probably rightly so, has a lot more interest with every, and J.R.R. Tolkien, I think, also has a lot more, you know, of an engaged symbolism there that is is more advanced than perhaps what the Godzilla series is bringing about. I mean, I I kind of in jest mentioned it earlier, but it is true that especially in the early 2000s there was some attempt to sort of have a Godzilla series where it was totally disjointed, and I think it's very difficult to see any level of symbolism in that series because you just basically have one Godzilla movie after another where it's totally a cash grab. That's just kind of, we have an obligatory Godzilla movie of the year, so because we know you'll go see it. Um I don't know. So I don't know that those have
Well,
overall a lot of.
that is intriguing. And look, I've never gotten into Godzilla versus Kong, but the 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 symbolism you talk about um, certainly has connections to the kind of themes that get talked about within Orthodoxy, within Al Mansul, within the Lord of Spirits podcasts, and so forth and so on. So, look, there is a lot of connections there. So it sounds like there is some level of base material, even if there's not, such an established and widespread fan base for the material. But one thing you noticed was that when you were within the Adventist culture, they kind of closed themselves off from this form of culture.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting that Orthodoxy remains open to the culture within the world, and Adventism's closedness from culture and Orthodoxy's openness to culture is certainly one of those things I think that we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time. So let's bookmark that one. I think that's an interesting
I like
thread.
it.
I think that's an interesting thread we can talk about in a
It
couple of
is.
weeks. And I think it's quite telling that the prophet Isaiah had a stance of being open to culture. He
Mhm.
was open to his culture and he engaged in the culture. Sometimes you engage with the culture in order to argue against it. Sometimes you engage with the culture in order to mock it. Sometimes you engage with the culture in order to subvert it. But the engagement with culture, is one of the themes within the biblical literature that you can see from end to end. And I think, John Walton has pulled that out in his Lost World series,
Yes.
that the engagement with culture is really essential. And, there's a lot to talk about. So look, this has to be looking at the calendar, the very first video that Freedom Indeed Ministries has been making in 2022. Do you have any new concrete plans or shows or content that you're ready to announce now?
We do actually have quite a bit that we're planning. So you know that for the next month we have quite a bit that we have really concrete plans on, working with you, and also a gentleman named Thaddeus Patrick, who he I'm going to be talking with him next week, and I'm really excited for that because he has a very unique approach. He actually is a life coach, but he got into life coaching, um that was his career, and then he read the book by Elder Thaddeus Vitovnica, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, and he essentially has created an entire life coaching program around that book, and just the way that that book has transformed his own life, he now shares with others, and I'm really excited to pick his brain about that. And then after that, our goals are to we want to get back into our roots a little bit and discuss a lot of the issues within Adventism. I know that, like, you sent me an article, and I'm going to respond to that article. And, and it kind of cracks me up, some of the things that these things bring up for me. Like, for example, in the article you sent me, one of the things, I won't get too much into it because I don't want to do any spoilers for future episodes, but one thing that cracks me up is when Adventists say things like, I want people to know that Jesus is enough. And I'm going, well, if that's what you want people to know, then you shouldn't be telling them to be Adventist, because Jesus isn't enough in Adventism. So things like that just crack me up. Um, but also, some other things as well. There's I think he's a Reformed Baptist. He might be Presbyterian, but he saw the series that Caleb and I did together on the American Gospel movie, where we discussed and picked apart some of the themes of that movie. And he actually sent me another movie series. I guess it's a movie. It's called Amazing Grace: The Story of Calvinism. And usually I don't do a lot of stuff. I don't usually engage with Calvinism very much, but when things get recommended to me, I do them. So there you go. I'm going to be doing some responses to that, and I'm trying to get Caleb on board for that too, because I think that would be fruitful. We'll see how his schedule pans out. And speaking of Caleb, Caleb is actually going to be continuing his own whole series of lessons. He's going to keep doing the Caleb's Corner show that he's been doing. So he has that in the works. And then he also has an entire series in the works that he's going to do, that's going to be, what did he call it? The Orthodox Intrigue class. And basically it's going to be an entire class for people who, at least the goal of it is, for people who have very little exposure to Orthodoxy but are interested in knowing more. So it's very much down to the basics of what Orthodox Christians believe. It's maybe even more basic than a catechism class, because the goal of it is to be able to really have this for people who have zero exposure whatsoever to Orthodoxy. Maybe they have some familiarity with um, like how a Seventh-day Adventist would have some familiarity with some Western concepts, but a lot of discussions would just have no real bearing. Like, I think even the idea of original sin, it's like when you're Seventh-day Adventist, I don't think you grasp necessarily why original sin matters, or what Catholics believe about original sin versus Protestants versus Orthodox versus whatever. None of that really has any bearing for you, because for you, whatever Adam and Eve accomplished or didn't in the garden, I just have these 10 commandments or whatever. That's an oversimplification, but the point is that Caleb's goal with this series is to really get to a point where you could come into this with zero knowledge whatsoever of anything Orthodox and leave with a sense that, hey, I get where these Orthodox people are coming from. So I'm excited for that series, and I'm going to be doing some more of the response videos, not just responding to Daniel Mesa. I am going to continue that series, but I'm going to do some more response videos. And what I'm really excited about getting into is I'm going to do my own sort of back to basics series, but it's going to be delving deep into the Trinitarian foundations of the scriptures. So I already have a couple of videos that have gone over this. Like, I did one on the angel of the Lord, and I did one that was a member exclusive, that was talking about the wisdom of God in the Old Testament, which you probably saw because you're on our membership. So you probably saw that one, but if you're for people watching, if you're not on the membership, that's a member exclusive, so you'd have to see it on Patreon. But I did those, but I'm going to continue doing that whole series because I really think that one of the things that anti-Trinitarians miss is they want us to come up with some proof text for the Trinity. And what I've discovered is that there doesn't have to be a proof text for the Trinity, because the very foundations upon which the scriptures are built are inherently Trinitarian, and I don't think the scriptures themselves are coherent without a Trinitarian concept backing it. And it's really interesting too, just to kind of tease that series a little bit. It's interesting when you look at the ancient Judaism, because that's what a lot of people like to try to do is say, well, Jews aren't Trinitarian, so therefore, this stuff can't be in the Old Testament. And I say au contraire, because modern Jews aren't Trinitarian, but Second Temple Jews actually, one of their big debates in Second Temple Judaism was over a concept called the two powers in heaven. And what's interesting is that the debate was not about whether there were two powers in heaven, or whether God existed in multiple, what we would call hypostases. That wasn't the debate. The debate was who is the second power. The first power was was talked about in terms of a father, and the second power was talked about in terms of a son. And so you have this father and the son figure that they're seeing all over the Old Testament. And there's actually a book called The Two Powers in Heaven, and that book is by a Jewish scholar. And it's interesting because what he does is he's a rabbinic Jew. So he actually rejects this idea of the two powers of heaven, but he's also an honest scholar. So he's taking a look and saying, hey, before we rejected this as heresy in the 2nd century, this was the universal belief in all of Judaism. What's up with that? And so you have this whole book where it's sort of addressing the elephant in the room, that prior to the writing of the Mishnah, all Jews believed something similar to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. And then all of a sudden, when they're compiling the Mishnah, when you read the Mishnah, what you see very quickly is that the Mishnah has no real interest in preserving Second Temple Judaism. The Mishnah's entire interest is in creating something that is Judaism without Christianity and without the potential of Christianity. So that's why, if you attend a Jewish Passover now, you will not see the same practices that you actually read about in Exodus. What you see is something strikingly similar to our Eucharist. That's not an accident. The rabbinic Jews created this practice specifically as a polemic against our Eucharistic practice. So, excuse me.
So a lot of good material coming up.
Yeah.
A lot of
So,
fruitful themes. I'm looking forward to more Caleb Corner. I'm looking forward to more of those other shows that you talked about.
and I'm looking forward to more foundations things.
Indeed.
So, what do you have planned for foundations for 2022?
Yeah, thank you. So this year, we're reworking the opening sequence of the Doctrine and Dogma section. We have a sequence of 9 opening sessions that really pick up insights from Father John Bear's The Mystery of Christ and his follow-up series to that, The Way to Nicaea. And within that, he picks up on a theme that you've just reflected on, the fact that the Holy Trinity is really an hypothesis that is axiomatic to the Christian reading of Scripture. And we dig into that. And so the opening sequence begins, in fact, with the church and discussing the church that you see today and how the church you see today is an organic outgrowth of the church throughout history, leading back to the foundations in the prophets and the apostles, and the cornerstone being Jesus Christ himself. We then move on to talking about the gospel and discussing what the gospel sounds like when it's proclaimed today, what the gospel sounded like when it was proclaimed in the first century, how we connect these gospels up and discuss whether any details need to be changed within the broader theme. Do you talk to people today exactly the same way as you talked to them 2,000 years ago? Do some details need to change? And if you're changing some details, what is the common thread? Is there a core that is changeless in time? So we discuss the gospel, and then all the subsequent issues to do with doctrine and dogma are then related back consistently throughout the rest of that series to the themes of the gospel, because the secret about the church's teaching about doctrine and about dogma is that it is there to clarify the terms of the gospel. And so we walk through the unveiling of tradition and the church's thinking, delving into Saint Irenaeus and his thinking about tradition, Vincent of Loryn's and his thinking about how to identify properly Catholic teachings of the church. And then we step into the dogmatic development within the church, how the church developed its worship, how the church developed and clarified the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, and the subsequent councils. And we walk through that, and then we conclude the series with descriptions of the church's view of eschatology, the second coming and the age to come, and then actually the last one in that sequence is actually reflecting back on creation and the world as it is today and how we experience God in and through the world. It's quite a different sequence than the sequence I had when we first designed the course. When we first designed the course 3 years ago, I had the idea that you would start at creation and finish with eschatology, and then the movement to Jesus and the gospel would be somewhere in the middle, and you would have the description of the consequences of that. But as I've worked over the last couple of years, I found a few issues with that sequence. One of the issues is if you start at creation as your first term, you have to describe an awful lot in order to begin to communicate. So there's a big burden on the opening few sessions. If you start with that, you've got to describe both God and the world. You've got to describe so much of everything. Whereas this sequence here has been motivated by Father John Bear's perspective, and indeed he is just picking up on the difference between Justin Martyr, who started with the creation of the world and moved on, and Saint Irenaeus, who actually began with Jesus Christ and seeing the world in the light of Jesus Christ. So we feel that there's a great opportunity to have a better sequence, a sequence that's easier to absorb, but also more grounded within the Orthodox tradition by starting and focusing on Jesus, who Jesus is, and building out from there how Jesus illumines the world, how he illumines life and death, how he illumines the world in terms of the creation and the world to come, and how he illumines the state of our own heart. Everything seen in the light of Jesus. So we've been working and polishing and reworking our thinking on how best to communicate Orthodox doctrine, and we're really keen to launch this this coming year. But that's not the full sequence of things, because then we have a 4-part series following that on spiritual formation, on identifying sin and passions and virtues and what it takes to build an Orthodox life. We have a 3-part series on worship, on what the worship of the Divine Liturgy, the worship of the annual cycle within Orthodoxy, and the weekly cycle within Orthodoxy. And we conclude the series with the 4-part series on the Holy Mysteries. And so we have a discussion about the spirituality of the Holy Mysteries and its practice. And that concludes our 20-part series that we've got planned for this coming year.
Wow. So that's a lot. Now, am I going to be able to access all of that? I'm speaking totally selfishly right now. But am I going to be able to access all of that on the Good Shepherd YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I hope that by March you'll begin to see the fruits of this rethinking and reworking beginning to drop. We took a break from that last year. We had so much new material to encompass from Metropolitan Hilarion Alfaev that we took a break on actually producing it online. But it's our ambition with this more refined approach, to also put extra effort into producing it online and publishing the series. Eventually, we'll take down the 2020 version and we'll consign that to mothballs and have this 2022, post-COVID, up-to-date series online reflecting our latest and best thinking about how to catechize to Australians in 2022.
Awesome. Now, that I am blown away by how great that sounds, to be honest with you, and that sounds like a huge undertaking. But I know that you also have some other plans for 2022. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so look, within the teaching of people about orthodoxy, my heart overflows with joy for God, and joy for the expanded and exalted perspective that orthodoxy brings to a practicing Christian. As I transition from 39 years of Seventh-day Adventism to a 3.5 year period of searching around and finding where I was going, and then entering orthodoxy and having my mind blown by the expanded scope of orthodox teaching and practice and culture. My perspective on God has radically changed and radically been renovated. And it doesn't happen just in one sitting or one go. It's a continual refinement and polishing. It's a peeling back of the onion skin layers. And it's been a healing of my heart that really was unknowns to me as an Adventist, had been kind of ravaged and hardened and made brittle as an Adventist. And there's been a huge healing process for me personally within Orthodox Christianity, as historic Christianity has seeped in and supplanted the crystallized doctrinal impositions, if you like, that hardened and calcified and made a stone heart, and I'd love to be able to communicate back to my Adventist friends and family, back to people who want to upgrade their version of Christianity to something with a bit more life. So, in discussion with you and Freed Indeed Ministries, I am intending to launch this series called Avid for Advent. So I am avid for the Advent. I am avid for Adventists, and I'm avid for people upgrading their view of God from a God who is based in law to a God who is fascinated and engaged with and interactive with humans and human culture. So I've got these two strands of thinking that when we teach orthodoxy, that I can also turn to teaching orthodoxy to people who'd like to upgrade their view of God.
I love that so much. I love that upgrading your view of God. I think that's such a important, I think that's such an important way of talking about it too. And I really love that. Now, I do a lot with Seventh-day Adventism, a lot with apologetics towards Seventh-day Adventists, and you do as well, and that's one of the reasons why we work so well together. But one thing that I do get asked sometimes, and I'm sure you do too, and maybe you can kind of elaborate, but you know, there's not that many Seventh-day Adventists in the world, and sometimes people ask um, maybe a fairly reasonable question of us, and that is, why do you spend so much of your apologetics effort on Seventh-day Adventists? Why not focus on Buddhists, which is a much larger population? Why not focus on, somebody recently asked me, why don't you focus on Reformed people? Because so many more Reformed people have been becoming Orthodox than Adventists, and there's many, many more Reformed people than Adventists. So why not focus your apologetics efforts on them? Why focus on Adventists so much? And so maybe you can help us to understand why you're not just avid for Advent, but you're avid for Adventists.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's just a recognition of where God placed me in the world. He raised me not in a Buddhist family. He raised me not in a Reformed family. He raised me in an Adventist family. And Adventism taught me a love for truth. When I was in cradle roll, my mother, as one of the teachers, taught me to sing Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to step out for the truth when you see it. And that's what I did in 2013 when I came to the conclusion that Ellen G. White is not a prophet of God. I followed that thread through and saw that there was within the baptismal vows that I had agreed to when I was baptized as an Adventist, two of the baptismal vows related to the fact that Ellen G. White and her experience of prophecy was the thing that gives Adventism its currency. And if I no longer believed that, then I needed to step out of Adventism and cease to be an Adventist. I ceased to be an Adventist because I believe in the value that Adventist culture taught me to place on the truth. So Adventism has taught me some very good things, some focus on truth, the focus on the ability to follow the evidence and see where the evidence leads, the ability to actually change my mind and be led to a new place. These are some of the qualities that Adventism has bred within me that I value today. In fact, when I reflect on who I am as an Orthodox Christian, I can genuinely say that I feel fully Adventist in its realized state. All the good things within Adventism, all the good qualities in here with me and are flourishing more than ever within Orthodox Christianity. It feels like I'm able to be the fully realized Adventist that I wanted to be, but didn't know how to be within the Adventist subculture. And so because I've come from the Adventist subculture, I've got a heart for Adventists. I want to help Adventists, even if you don't want to leave Adventism, you don't have to leave Adventism, but there is a desire, I think, within Adventists to reach a greater level of intimacy with God, a greater level of understanding that the relationship with God is greater and more different than simply the idea that he's my judge and I've got to be concerned about that judgment that's happening. That was one of the fixations that I had as an Adventist, and to understand as an Orthodox Christian that there are so many more dimensions to our relationship with Jesus and with the Holy Trinity, that it's a massive upgrade in spiritual experience. Just yesterday I was reading a book written by a self-professed progressive Adventist. And I got right through to the end of the book, and I read the last chapter of his book. And the last chapter was really a reminiscing or a statement of his anticipated judgment by God. And he was reflecting on his thoughts and feelings related to the judgment of God with respect to him. And as I read through, what I saw in it was a kind of fatalism. Was a kind of fatalism that says, look, I really don't know what's going to happen in the judgment. I don't really know how I'm going to be evaluated by God. But look, whatever God decides, whatever outcome he has in mind with me, I'll accept. And I was kind of fascinated by that, because that was my exact shtick 8 years ago. I used to say exactly the same things. And I realized as I moved into Orthodoxy that level of fatalism, which was what I thought faith consisted of,
Right.
actually isn't faith. It actually isn't a living faith. It is a kind of pagan fatalism.
Right.
And faith is something entirely different. And I'd love a chance, if there are any Adventists listening to this, love a chance to talk with you about what an upgraded version of a living faith looks like, and why and how that's different from that kind of fatalism that we have in talking about, the investigative judgment and my expectation about God's judgment of me. But in between those two things, what are the other things that is blocking Adventists from this upgraded view of God?
Mm-hmm.
Why is an upgraded view of God needed? Why do I think Adventists don't have the complete picture of God? Adventists know they've got the truth. Well, I don't think so. I don't think Adventists have the complete truth. And I think that there are a lot of really good motives within Adventism, and some good insights within Adventism that are being warped and distorted by some other impositions to Adventism that are preventing a greater view of God. And within blog posts and YouTube videos that we're planning on Freed Indeed Ministries, I'm going to explore some of these themes and take people on a journey of exploration of ancient Christianity that's alive and living today, and on what Orthodox Christianity can bring to an Adventist mindset.
Man, I love that so much. And I think that's a perfect answer. And I have to say, I especially loved what you said about, in Orthodoxy, you have become the fullness of what you were in Adventism. It's not like I was just thinking about this last night, is that, that is one of the things I really love about Orthodoxy, is that becoming Orthodox from another Christian tradition in particular, but I would say even from, I've talked to people who were raised Buddhist who became Orthodox, and what I've noticed is that becoming Orthodox isn't so much about losing yourself or losing it's not about, well, everything I have thought and done up to this point is trash, I'm Orthodox now. It's about coming to really find the best of those things, of who you are as a person coming into Orthodox. And yeah, there are going to be some things that you have to give up. Um, but ultimately, everything that you have to give up is something that you'll very quickly discover isn't worth holding on to. You know, we give up things like our passions, we give up things like our sins, we give up things and things that harm us. And those aren't things that are worth keeping, but everything that is worth keeping, coming into Orthodoxy isn't about getting rid of things that you actually would want to keep if you really had the choice. Coming into Orthodoxy is about giving up everything that you shouldn't hold on to anyway, and then becoming the very best possible version of whatever it is that you already are. You know, if you're really gung ho about Stoic philosophy and you're really into Seneca and all of this, then I think you become the best Stoic when you become Orthodox, because everything that is valuable about Stoicism finds its fullness in Orthodoxy. And if you're really into Adventism, then I don't think you have to give up those great things that you find in Adventism. I think you become the best possible and the fullest possible Adventist, because that's what fulfillment is. It's filling to overflowing. And just the way you said that was just so beautiful and powerful. So I can't wait to read your articles. I really can't. I can't wait to see I can't wait to see your catechesis, to see how it unfolds. As I said before, I loved your first series. I thought it was just amazing. And there was so much about it that I loved. And I think what you're doing now sounds even better, and your focus sounds great. And I think that that's actually a really awesome sort of introduction for where we're going to be going in a couple of weeks when we talk about how to explain tradition to Adventists. So, um, that's maybe that's a good place for us to stop for today. Um, and I look forward to continuing that discussion in 2 weeks when we talk about how to explain tradition to Adventists. Again, I know that that title might sound daunting because the mere word tradition tends to set off some alarm bells, but I promise that we have a plan here, and I think that we're gonna. I'm really excited to see, and if you have any friends or family who are Adventist, we would love to have them watching next week, or I mean, 2 weeks from now. It'll be for me. It'll be Saturday at 8 p.m. For Loryn, it'll be Sunday. What is that, like midday
3,
or
3 p.m. on Sunday.
3 p.m. on Sunday? So if you're in Australia, or if you're in Melbourne, I guess, because there's a couple time zones there. So if you're in Melbourne, it'll be 3 p.m. on Sunday. If you're here in the States, it'll be 8 a.m. Or 8 p.m. on Saturday. So either way, definitely join us. And if you're Seventh day Adventist, we definitely want to see you there. And hopefully you can even join us live, because it would be really excellent to be able to interact with some feedback at that time. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and sharpen our approach that way. So either way, thank you very much. Thank you everybody who joined us live today, especially I noticed Allison from A Devotional Heart. She has her own YouTube stuff. She was in the chat a little bit. So thank you for joining. And that's A Devotional Heart. Definitely check out her YouTube channel. And on shameless plug for her, I guess, on January 14th, if you check out her YouTube channel, you just might see my ugly mug on there too. So definitely be be checking out these different things, because we have lots of great YouTube channels, lots of great resources for you. And definitely make sure that you go over and subscribe to the Good Shepherd Orthodox Church in Melbourne, Australia on YouTube, so that you can see these catechesis lectures, so that you can see what they're doing, and hopefully even participate and benefit, because I really think what they're doing is so awesome, and I can't wait to see the results. So share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed. God bless.